start with some prayers. Om Jnanatirmirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangolangayate Girim Yatkripatamaham Vande Shiguru Dinatarine Ajanulambita Bhujo Kanakavadato Sankirtanai Kapitaro Kamalaya Vishwambaro Dvijabaro Yugadharma Palo Bhande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavataro Tavaivasmi Najivami Tvaya Vina Iti Vigyaya Radhe Tvam Nayamam Charanantike Hoya Chena Hoya Bena Prabhu Jotodas Sab Koriyavanda Dante Korigras Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyahevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. First, offer my respects to my guru, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj. I was lucky. I was 13 years old when I met him, and I traveled with him for maybe about 10 years around the world and lived with him in India, and most of the things in Hindi and Bengali. We would hear the classes. So everything I say is coming from him. And the way that Vedas are taught is when we have the books, but it's not, we understand that knowledge is something that exists inside of the heart. And when you practice things spiritually, you can not even read the books, but that truth can become realized and can become part of you and part of your being. So one part of learning Vedas is to read the book, to take the book out and read and study by yourself, right? And then, it's my book, right? And then the other part is to, like we're doing right now here, from teacher to disciple, and then that can give you a true knowledge. And if you wanted to have one of the two, you would pick learning from a teacher as opposed to from the book. Like, so everything I say, I learned to him, and my life completely dedicated. Always important to respect that. It's a very important part of the Indian culture to respect the teachers. In the West, you're like, I don't care about the teachers, all about me. It's like very like ego. I discovered that or everything, but without the blessings of the teacher, even if you get it here, you don't get it here. It doesn't count for real. So, what are we talking about when we're talking about consciousness? What's the word in German? Consciousness? Bewusstsein. Bewusstsein.
Bewusstsein.
I'm bad at this.
Actually, being consciousness.
Being
consciousness. Being.
Okay.
Bewusstsein. Sein is being, to be.
Okay.
And bewusst is conscious.
Bewusst.
To be conscious.
Bewusstsein. To be conscious. So then the question comes, well, what is being conscious? And what's the difference between consciousness and existence? In other words, we have a physical body, we have our brain and stuff like that. Is consciousness just a, an electrical circuitry inside of our brain? Like the AI right now in Google, there's a discussion about they've made an AI. Is it actually conscious? Is it not conscious? Right? Is it a sentient being? What is the actual? Is it just an advanced computer with information flowing that is consciousness? And if so, then why does it matter? And what's the point, or what's the relationship between physical reality? Like also, like how do you measure consciousness? Like information, consciousness. Like can you stick it in a bottle? You can't touch it like this. You can touch, you can see, you can feel it, you can smell it, you can taste it. But consciousness is, someone can be sitting there and conscious. They could be dead or not dead. You don't know if they're conscious or not. So what is the, in Sanskrit they say there's jad, which means inert matter, unconscious matter, physical, like earth, water, fire, air, ether. That's jada, that's material junk of this world, right? Then there's chitta, right? Or there's consciousness, right? There's awareness, and that's what a living being has. And then there is God and the Supreme. So what's the relationship between physical reality and subtle consciousness? What's that connection? How does that actually work, right? So what the Vedas tell us is that this body's kind of like a car. It's a vehicle that we're using for some time. Every 7 years, every cell of the body changes. So it's not really us, it's always in change. And if you see like a little 2-year-old little kid and then you see yourself now, very different facial hair, like it's completely different. And then you could say, well, your mind changes also, right? From a 2-year-old's brain and then our brain right now, it's like, what's the same about it? Then you could say, well, maybe it's the memory that makes identity of ourselves. But then if you have Alzheimer's, if you have amnesia, if you don't, there's so much of my childhood I don't remember, right? So what is the thing that defines us? If the difference between life and, not life and death, between, let's try to translate it into English, between matter and consciousness, if we are consciousness, then what's the difference between us and inert matter? And then if this body is inert matter, it's made from food that we eat and vitamins and nutrients, then how does this work with identification? How does this work with our whole sense of being, right? So it's described that there's the body, which is matter, and then there's consciousness, which is us, which is what you could say is the soul, right? Mm-hmm. How do you say in German, soul? Seele. Okay. So you've got the soul, which is by nature is different than matter. Otherwise it would be matter, right? It has a different qualities to it. It's a different kind of chemical composition. Now the seele, or the soul, by nature doesn't want to die, right? No one ever really wants to die, and people try so many ways to live forever as much as they can. If they can't live forever with physical health, and they try to leave a legacy, or they try to have children to carry on my legacy, or to some people write books, or some people do different things to be able to kind of extend life, because that's the nature of the soul. So the ancient Vedas, the books that we were talking about, says that the soul by nature is eternal, right? It doesn't die. The body dies, but the soul moves on. And that's how different kids can have different temperaments. Well, I'm not a parent, but I've heard from many other parents, and I've read that every kid, even if they try to shape a kid in a specific way, there's a certain nature that they have, and there's always the debate: is it nature or is it nurture? And then you could say, well, you're familiar with nature, nurture? Nurture. How do you say nurture? What? Nahrung.
Nutrients? No. Nurture, you mean...
Like a mother takes care of a child?
How you get nurtured from the mother.
Yeah.
Okay. Wie du genährt wirst.
Mhm.
Ja.
Mhm.
So there's the debate. Okay, well...
Ich glaube, es geht um Gene, ne?
Ja. Und auch, glaub so, schon wie du behandelt wirst.
Ja.
Glaube ich, ne? Also...
So
I think we get it.
you think you get it? You get it, right? This is a Sanskrit class as much as a German class, right? So the debate is, okay, our consciousness, the way that we see and perceive and interact with reality, is it nature or is it nurture? Mm-hmm. And most people come to the conclusion it's kind of like a mixture of both, right? Nature and nurture.
Absolutely.
Right?
Genau.
Okay. But then the question is, okay, well, nurture is kind of easy to understand, that a certain environment or condition can shape our way of seeing a certain things, right? So it's like the way, if you go into psychology, the way your parents treat you as a child, the way that your elders, the TV shows that you watched, and these different things, that kind of like impacts us. And we'll talk about that later on, because it's very valuable. But if we look on the nature side, that's a little bit more puzzling. Where does our nature come from? How can twins be so radically different? I know, like, identical twins. I have a few different sets of identical twins, and the brother, like, you guys are twins? Like, you guys are so different, you know? And it's, where does one's nature come from? Now, this debate's been happening since all of history, and I'm just giving you the Vedic perspective, like it or not, right? But the Vedic perspective says that our consciousness is not bound by the body. Our consciousness exists beyond the body. And that's why we can sit here and then think of the beach right now. We're not physically touching the beach, even though our air is not touching the beach. There's no physical connection, but our mind or our consciousness is now outside of the body into a separate state of being. Maybe sometimes you have an experience when you're falling asleep, or when you're doing some type of meditation, that you're observing your body, but it's not you. You're kind of like an outside observer of that thing, and there's a separation between body and consciousness. If you've had, you know what I'm talking about. If not, then don't worry about it. Maybe you'll have one day. All right. But it's so. What the Vedas say is that the consciousness by nature meaning by like its constitutional composition. Hello. She's also a manager here.
Yeah.
She's the one who, she says, we don't want this program anymore, and then she kicks us off.
We
Right?
we met her in the yoga class today.
Yeah.
This morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Very nice. So basically, the consciousness is eternal and comes into this body for a certain period of time, a certain nature of time. But what happens is the body gets covered over, the soul, the consciousness gets covered over in a specific way that now we identify with the body, and we don't see the difference between the body and the soul. They kind of get infused as one. One way of viewing it is like if you take a piece of iron and you stick that inside a fire, then all the qualities of the fire get imbued into the iron, and it becomes red hot, takes on all those qualities. So our body, in a sense, takes on all the qualities of the soul, which is, I guess you could say minute, at least it's non-physical, takes on all the qualities. Another way of seeing it is like if you have a TV, right? And you're watching a movie, and then you go like this and you move because it's like, oh my gosh, because you were identifying so much with that screen. Even though it's separate, your consciousness kind of got absorbed in that thing, and the identity went beyond what's real with yourself. But you can get so immersed in it, or you cry in the movie. I heard like the first time the TVs come out, people are like running out of the ways from the cars and stuff in the things. The brain couldn't like create that separation or that distinction. So, but if by definition the consciousness and the body are completely different things, then how do they kind of like fuse together? How do they integrate as one? Kind of like if you have oil and water, they're like fundamentally different substances and they don't mix. So what's the connection point that this body can take on all the qualities of consciousness? Make sense? Like how does that happen? And this is something which is called the chitta, right? In my book, I talk about there's 8 elements. These maybe you've heard in acupuncture or in different types of yoga or many old kind of philosophies of science. They talk about the elements: earth, physical reality; water, more subtle than that; fire, more subtle than that; more subtle than that is air; more subtle than that is ether; then mind; then intelligence; then ego; then identity. But these are all different transformations of elements of this world. So a metaphor that kind of communicates the idea is you have the soul. Let's pretend like this is the soul, the consciousness, and then it gets covered by one thing, which is called the chitta, and that's what we're going to talk about today. This one kind of, I see it as like a translucent plasma. It's not physical, it's subtle, right? But I kind of see it like a TV screen, a mirror, a piece of glass, a translucent plasma that covers the soul. Then what covers that is the identity. Then what covers that is the intelligence. Then what covers that is the mind. Then what covers that is the is ether or sound vibration or space. And then what covers then the next layering covering that is air. So it's going from subtle to physical. So air is still, you can't see it, but it's more physical, more tangible. Then more tangible than that is fire, the heat inside the body, then water, the fluids in our body, then our physical body. So a way is you can see like the soul is covered by these layers of the material elements, but it still remains separate from those material elements. Now anything that happens in the earth, which is for example like your hand, then it touches, it sends a nerve, which sends an electrical pulse, which then sends fire, and then sends information down to your brain. It's basically what's going on in physical reality is getting translated and reflected through the elements into the thing that we call chitta, that first kind of covering of the soul. And that chitta that covers the soul is equivalent to a TV screen. That it's kind of like we're sitting inside there like a little robot. I'm just visualizing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you're sitting there surrounded by these screens, and you're identifying, and you're moving and feeling and identifying with what's going on that screen, and that's how we're going through life and living life, and everything's getting kind of affected that way, and we think that it's us, right? And when we're born, we kind of identify with this screen. So you're like, okay, well, that seems like a system that kind of works. So what, right? That's life. Why is that helpful? Why is that useful? Well, the reason why it matters is because that screen also has a distortion effect. That screen can be a specific color. It could, kind of like our screens right now, you can change the saturation level. You can put a color filter on it, right? There can be a fly on it or a piece of poop or something, fly poop, right? Or whatever they can be. I hope no one poops on their phones, but there can be something on the screen that now changes it, or if you see the screen kind of like a mirror and it changes the shape and it makes it like fatter or skinnier, then our relationship with reality is distorted. It's distorted in of the way that it is, and by being distorted, we don't have an accurate grip on reality, and it can cause all kinds of disturbances and suffering, right? So we say that spiritual practices, in a lot of way, is Cheto Darpana Marjana Baba Mahadavi Nirvapanam, the Sanskrit text, thousands of years old. It says that there's the mirror of the heart, or that screen of the heart, and cultivating consciousness is really just clearing it so that you can have an accurate view on reality. You can have an accurate handle and relationship with reality that's not distorted through perversion or through things that are not true. And by doing that, then you can be peaceful, then you can be powerful, that things can be good. On a mundane level, on a more kind of like less spiritual level, I guess you could say, that's what the process of therapy is, right? You're scared, something happened to you when you're a child, and you're scared of eating avocados because once you smell a rotten avocado, I know someone who's like that, right? They're like, I had a rotten avocado as a kid. They're like, oh, avocados! And they're all like freaked out with this trauma of avocados. So that it's a joke, but we have it all in our own ways, you know? When I grew up in Bengal, in the monastery, in the temples, and we had one cleaning lady used to come. She was terrified of snakes. You'd say snakes, she would freak out, right? She had something they had snakes in the area. It was a valid fear, but she was way more scared than anybody else from it, you know? So that's a strong thing with phobias. But also, if you go into like Freud or go into different psychology, that the impression that your parents gave to you and how you grew up as a child, your archetypes will choose what kind of spouse you choose, what kind of relationships that you have, and the whole trajectory of your life could go in that direction. Or there's a lot of effect that these impressions or these distortions or these marks on the chitta create on the very life that we live. Now, what the ancient wisdom tells us is that the sad truth is that if we still think that we're the body, if we still don't know who we are as a soul, which is pretty much everybody, then that means there's just a whole bunch of fly poop on our screen. Our screen is really distorted and really impacted, that we have a completely effed up, right? Completely terrible, distorted view on reality. And that is called, in Sanskrit, it's called avidya, or it's called ignorance. And because of that distorted truth, because of that ignorance, the lack of viewing of reality correctly, then we suffer and we suffer, and we experience all different types of suffering. A mosquito bites us, we think that it's us, so then we suffer, we experience pain for that. But if we were able to see things clearly, we could detach ourselves, and no pain from a mosquito biting, no pain from anything happening. Very high, some monks would sit like in fires or sit in water and completely no effect, because of an accurate kind of impression on an accurate relationship with reality. Also, sometimes we suffer in our mind. Have you ever had a lot of stress and you're stressed out about something, and you have a friend like, What are you stressed out about? Go to the beach, right? What are you stressed out? Go do something. And it's like, why was I tripping out about that thing, right? Nothing else changed in factual reality. Just our perception of it, just our idea of it, just our concept changes, and then our pain completely goes away. So this avidya, or this ignorance, this distortion on our chitta, is what screws us all up, right? So you would say enlightenment is a complete purification of this chitta, complete cleaning of that consciousness. In our last class, we were talking about the different stages of understanding God and reality. We had a whole class last time. So that's the first understanding, like the white light, that place of nirvana. That's what I'm talking about right now, about a completely clear chitta. So,
Can I ask a question?
sure, yeah.
Okay, it's a little bit complicated, but
Uh-huh.
it's about integrated or distorted part.
Uh-huh.
So, for example, we all only embody a part of our soul because the other part is distorted. So we are not connected to this part because of trauma. For example, especially in the Western part of the world, the feminine is very hurt. So, or especially in Germany, it's a lot about giving and unconditionally giving, but they are not able to receive unconditionally because receiving unconditionally is the mother wound. It's connected to the mother, and you need to heal the mother wound to receive unconditionally. So now the question is, so you are aware of this, but what I sense is awareness is not enough. So you also have to embody it, because I can be aware that I'm not able to receive unconditionally, and I can receive unconditionally with my ego, but maybe it still feels not good, or I feel shamed about it. So it's actually about transforming the shame into unconditional love, so you can embody it. So my question is, so for example, I work a lot with embodiment, with energy healing and channeling. So my question is, how do you embody it in the Vedic? What is the technique to embody the consciousness? You know what I mean?
So I'll repeat the question back, but I believe I understand what you're saying. You're saying that our suffering comes from a distortion, what I'm using this word, avidya, ignorance of reality, that's the bird poop that's stuck on the chitta, right? And then you could be aware that there's bird poop that's distorting what's going on. Is it okay if I call it bird poop? Is that not insulting anybody, right? Okay, so you can be aware of the bird poop on the chitta, but that's hello. But that doesn't how do you say heal? That doesn't clean it off.
Exactly.
It doesn't clean it off. What you really need to do is clean it off, so then you're good. So you're like, what is the Vedic process of cleaning that bird poop, right? I went to Tulum and I listened to a monk and he told me how to clean bird poop off a mirror. So so how do you clean that off, and how do you embody a healthy way of being, is your question?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, we're gonna get there. That's in the cast. So we're on the way. But good question. Good question, right?
It's therapy for the soul.
What's therapy for the soul, right? How does that work, right? So let's talk more about bird poop. Let's talk more about. It's gonna be a soundbite for my video role. Let's talk about bird poop. So. The chitta, the consciousness, imagine it like a mirror, right? We said, or like a gelatinous kind of like a jellyfish, like an embryo around a baby, but it's subtle. And this chitta, we're saying, okay, it can be dirty, it could be bird poop, but let's bring the example deeper. Is that this chitta has a vibration to it. There's a certain vibration to it. Like maybe you've felt that, like you hit your hand on something or you hit your toe, right? And then the next time you bring your hand to that area, it begins to hurt, or you're like it something's happening that makes you pull your hand back. The next time after that trauma from physical contact was made. Does that make sense? Like, for example, like flinching. Like if someone hits you a couple times and then you flinch, and then they just go like this, and you're like that already,
Yeah.
right? Because there's so what's happening in that moment. One is at first the first hit is creating, in a sense, like a mark or an indentation inside of this mirror or this chitta. People call this a samskar in Sanskrit. That's the word, is samskar. It means an impression, right? So everything that we see, everything that we smell, every interaction that we have is leaving a certain mark, a certain impression onto this chitta. And that impression is not just, like you could say, it's not just a smudge, but that impression also has a vibrancy. So like a heavy trauma is like super, super vibrant, and something little is just like a small vibrancy. And we have millions and millions of these different impressions, and some are stronger, and some are weaker, and some are just a slight vibration, and some are a strong vibration, and everyone has a different, how do you say, composition of bird poops. All different birds have been all over our with different textures and dimensions on our chitta.
Not always bird poops. It's also good things.
Good impressions also.
Good impressions also.
Yeah, exactly. Like when we were doing the music,
Yeah.
when we were doing the kirtan, the whole point of is twofold. Point one point is we're trying to push other impressions out, right? And another thing is we're putting good impressions on, right? It's like we're wiping off bird poop, and then we're putting like a sticker of a flower that's like stained glass or something like that, right? And so the impressions that we have are all different, and you can have better ones. That's why some people are just like completely traumatized and can't do anything, and then some people, they're just like always happy, and something really bad happens to them, like, oh well.
Yeah.
And they're going like, what? How are you okay with that? You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
it's a different kind of, it's a different impression. It's a different mark. So so that's how it works. And there's the vibrancies, right? So when we talk about spiritual life, remember in the beginning I was talking about how the Vedas, they have Kama Sutra, which is about sexuality, right? They have Malayuddha, Jiu-Jitsu, fighting that came from the Indian Malayuddha. You can study like the history of Jiu-Jitsu, originated in India, then went to Japan, then went to Brazil and stuff. I studied Jiu-Jitsu, so we look into that. But that's also, so it has like fighting sciences, it has weaponry, it has archery, it has all different types of thing. Why would something which is essentially a spiritual philosophy, something that's ultimately meant to lead to enlightenment, deal with these apparently mundane things? And the idea is that we're trying to get the chitta straight in relation to these important kind of like factors of life, right? So what makes an impression? Abhyasena, which is called practice. You do something again and again and again, and then it kind of just gets a stronger indentation and a stronger mark in that, and that's called a practice or a thing, and that's a chitta. So like if I play the drum, I played it so many times, I can just go like this, and it's like it's inbuilt. So to answer your question, what are the different tools? One thing is repetition, impression of the kind of impressions that you want on your chitta, right? Another thing is to see, okay, when something is vibrating, there's a trigger, there's something that's causing a mark on our chitta, on our consciousness, which is not true. Then by being aware of this, you can kind of consciously clean that. And a lot of meditations, I said, okay, meditate on nothing. Okay, what's coming up in your consciousness? Be aware of it, see it, now let it go, right? And then you kind of just clear your mind and clear your consciousness. It's clearing like the different things. So if you're just observing the chitta, you see it's like there's worms and bird poop and everything's all squirming all over the thing. You go, oh, that's not good. And you kind of can like just clear it with your consciousness, and you can clear it with your mind, right? So, makes sense so far?
Yeah.
Is it like you take a moment and you hear into yourself, and maybe then
And you can see things more clearly when you're not
clearly.
identifying with the movie. You're like, oh, it's
when-
just a
when-
movie.
When it don't feel good, you say no, or you don't do this, so you don't get this bad vibes.
In principle, yes. Let's go into more detail, since you guys are a smart crowd, right? We're good. these processes of cleaning the heart are called, some people will say yoga, and some people will say sadhana, or a practice. There is a difference between sadhana and yoga, but for our purposes right now, we can say that. So there's one thing which is called jnana yoga, there's something which is called karma yoga, and there's something which is called bhakti yoga, right? And when we say yoga, we're not talking about stretching. That's also a type of yoga. That's Ashtanga yoga. That has a process as well, which I guess we can talk about if you want. But the Jnana yoga is what I described before, is by bringing knowledge and awareness to what is truth, and simply through knowledge and awareness, then your relationship with that truth changes, and you can kind of clear the chitta. So the example, like I just gave, is you're watching a movie, and then you get scared. You're like, "Oh no!" And you're like, "It's just a movie," and then you don't care that much. Like, you realize that it's just a movie. You realize that it's not what you were identifying with, and you chill. So it's like, "Oh no, I did this, and it's gonna be so bad." And you're like, "You know what? I crashed the car. It's okay. I have insurance." Right? It's like you've got your knowledge, and just being aware of things. And this is a very powerful practice. The more that you study and understand the nature of reality, the more information, gyan means knowledge, that you have, the more you can implement this jnana yoga. So from one perspective, what we're doing right now could be called jnana yoga, because I'm giving you some knowledge in this from the Veda. I didn't make it up, right? But I'm taking some knowledge, and you're learning that knowledge, and you're like, "Oh, I see. Okay, well, there's a chitta, and then there's bird poop, and there's my identification with the chitta, it's my identification with the things. And next time I'm all bothered, oh, that's just some bird poop, right?" And then that knowledge empowers you to not be bound by that perception. Make sense? The knowledge empowers you to not be bound by that perception. So one process is jnana yoga. Certain temperaments, everyone's individual. Every consciousness is not the same. Everyone's individual. Certain temperaments from nature and also from nurture are more inclined to an intellectual approach of cleaning the chitta. But not everyone. And it's not complete, because that's only one facet of our being. Another facet of our being is our physical body, right? Is physical reality that we live in. And this you can call is karma yoga, right? The yoga, or the spiritual process of karma, of action, of how do we live in the world, right? What do we do? So we could say, for example's sake, even though it's not the full truth, that I was playing this drum. The camera, yay! I was playing this drum earlier on, and it was a physical action that I was doing. It was a karma. It was not just information in my head, but it was something that I was doing with my body. But that was now becoming a spiritual process, which is, in a sense, you could say, purifying my body. And more specifically, through purifying the body, we're purifying the chitta, or we're purifying the consciousness, or we're cleaning that off, right? A good way, a better probably way of saying this is, everything you do is affecting that chitta vibrancy, and affecting the colors and the texture and the shape and the poops and everything you do. So if you do bad stuff, if you go around slapping people over the head or shooting people or whatever, then that affects your chitta, and you go home, you're not slapping anyone at that moment, you're not doing that, but you still feel like shit, right? You're still it stays in your consciousness, it stays in your chitta. My grandfather, actually, he was in the Second World War in America. He's American, right? But he was in Germany on D-Day and that. And then there was a boy. They were storming a house, and they were all really scared. He opened a closet, and there was a boy inside, and he stabbed the boy. And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry," and the boy said, "God bless," and died, right? And my grandfather was traumatized for this, for like, for you can imagine, right? But for his whole life, he would wake up dreams, freaking out about that, you know, and terrible. I mean, just thinking about it, like, it's painful, right? So just telling that story, you could probably observe your chittas right now. A little mark was made, a little vibrancy was happening, it was uncomfortable, it was difficult, right? And my grandfather actually doing that had a stronger vibrancy, and he'd wake up at night with traumas and PTSD and all kinds of issues with that.
But before the example with the TV, with the movie, it sounds like a wall before your how do you call it?
Soul.
Itchen,
Chitta.
chitta, yeah. But this example, it's not possible to have a wall to protect it. So this bird poop is is really big, and you can't clean it so easy. Or
Well, yeah. Okay, I've described the chitta as a TV. I've described it as a mirror. I've
Yeah.
described it as a glass. I've described it as like an embryo that covers
So if
that covers. It's all the same thing. Yeah. So there's no wall, there's no boundary, and just as when we're watching a TV, you can identify and fully absorb yourself in that and forget your body. So what we have right now in a conditioned state is we identify with the chitta, and we haven't, in a sense, separated ourselves from that chitta. So the chitta is our consciousness. The chitta is us, because that's what the identification is. This body is me. Now, how much this monk tells me that that's not my foot. If someone's got a pickaxe and hammering it, I'm like, you're hitting my foot. I still identify with that. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I did want to clarify that our experience does not experience a separation between us and what happens in the chitta. Our experience is as the chitta is us, and that's what our ignorance is. So whatever's going on in the chitta feels like us. Enlightenment is when we can say, oh, that's the chitta, and we can clean the chitta, and eventually we'll get to this later, is get rid of the chitta and just be enlightened, just be the soul without any covering. But we'll get there. That's going ahead. But what was your question? I'm not sure if I'm answering it, or did that answer?
Yeah.
Did that deal with it? Or?
At first you told us, oh, it's just a movie, so it doesn't matter, no problem. It sounds like you had an umbrella, and the bird poops come on this, and you don't let it into your mind. But now it's another example. So it is in your mind because you have this experience, and then you have to clean it or to repair it or handle it
The
in
chitta,
the right way.
the chitta is your mind, but
Yeah.
your mind is not you. Who you are is not your mind, is not the chitta. You're something which is greater. But because of being in a conditioned state in this world, you think you're your mind, you think you're your body, and you're identifying with these things. So our experience, like I said before, is the chitta is us. What's going on is us. And that's how it feels. It doesn't feel like we have an umbrella that's protecting us. But when we have more knowledge, we say, oh, I'm not the umbrella. It is an umbrella that's protecting the bird poop. And I don't have to identify with this bird poop, and I don't have to let it on me. Does that kind of reconcile? It's both.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's both. There's factuality, and then there's what's truth, and then there's what the experience of truth is, which is not truth, and spiritual life is about coming to truth, right? So so my grandfather had a very strong, it was like an eagle or something, like really an elephant or something, right? It was so. Jnana yoga is, like I said, using your mind to distinguish what's what. Karma yoga is the process of using physicality to create impressions in the chitta, to clean the chitta, to deal with the chitta in many ways. So just as doing bad things stick with you in your consciousness, in your chitta, in the same way, doing good things also stick in your consciousness. Now, what is a good thing? That's a whole another discussion. If you're here next week, we might talk about different qualities of action and being. We call it the gunas. I'm creating a course on this now. There's different states of being, but I'm not going to get into that. It's a whole other whole course that I'm creating. But doing good things, just to simplify it, also sticks with you. So if you go and you give someone some candy, or you do some philanthropy, they say some of the happiest things you can do is philanthropy, or you can do good things in the world, and that kind of sticks with you. So another process of cleaning the chitta is karma yoga, or the spiritual process of doing physical things, right? Some people call that seva. So I would like to build here in Tulum an ashram, a temple, right? To have luxury wellness resort that has the spiritual process and stuff, but it's also a temple. And it's like, oh, well, why do you need a physical building for spiritual life? You don't, but it also leaves an impression in the chitta. Like right now, we're sitting by the nature, in beach. The sun's out. It's nice, and the impression of this class that's being put onto our consciousness is a lot nicer than if we were in the middle of winter or in a hailstorm, with dead bodies all around us or something. It would be like we wouldn't be.
It's a little better here, yeah.
little bit better, right? Just a little, right? So our physical encounters also affect, correct, impressionate, leave a samskar or a mark on our chitta, on our consciousness, on our physical reality. So getting into the processes of doing a lot of the physical stuff is, in a sense, also a spiritual process. So that you've got karma yoga, and then you've got jnana yoga, the two I described, right? The karma is physicality, jnana is knowledge. By the way, you guys are getting a super cool class right now. And when I say this, I'm not saying this because I'm giving you a cool class. Like half of the monks in the monastery would not be able to explain this stuff in this much detail. The way that you guys know, like understanding karma jnana yoga. Like she's been doing this her whole life. I bet like a lot of this is like a different perspective. That she's like, this is, you guys are, not to toot my own horn, but you guys are lucking out. This is like really good. Right? So those are certain processes. But the problem with those processes is that karma yoga needs physical reality, is about the physical world, but that's not us. That's not us. So the impressions and what it does on the chitta and everything is good, but it's not perfect because it's dealing with faulty tools. Does that make sense? It's faulty tools. It's like, it's not real, and I mean it is real. This world is real, but it's limited. It's our soul. We are eternal beings, for example, right? And we want to have happiness for all of eternity, and we want to live for all of eternity, and love to this greatest existence, and you can never get that through a physical reality. A common way of understanding. A lot of people come to the spiritual path. It's like, oh, I made all this money, but I'm not happy from it, right? It doesn't satisfy the soul, because the soul is fundamentally a different substance that's never pleased from something else, which is a different substance, which is physicality. So if we're trying our spiritual enlightenment, which is dealing on a soul level, which is even more subtle and more powerful than the chitta, then the physical stuff we do will be really good for clearing the chitta, and can maybe put the chitta in the right place, but it's still lacking. It's still an imperfect spiritual process. That's why when people are like, I take ayahuasca or something for a spiritual process, I'm like, okay, maybe that has something, but it's still missing, right? It's still a physical thing that's inducing something subtle, but it's got its limitations. Makes sense? So then if we talk about jnana yoga, using the mind, using knowledge, intellect, saying this is this, that's that, how do we define things? My mind works a lot like that. You could probably tell from the class. Like in this book, the first thing we talk about dharma, or purpose. So we talk about what is nature, and we talk about like the chemical composition of what creates nature and what type of things has a nature, and the soul. And then we go into, okay, earth, what's the definition of earth, and how does earth work, and then what's its relationship with fire, what's its relationship with water, what's its relationship with air. And you can get very, some people, another type of jnana yoga is called Sankhya yoga. Sankhya means to count, right? So we're counting. Okay, we're going to figure out what's going on here. So what's going on here? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 mats, right? And then we have 1, 2. We have this number of people, and then we have one sun. And you're like counting and categorizing and putting things in spreadsheets in your mind and understanding reality. So we're like, okay, we've got this chitta, we've got this piece of bird poop over here. You got this thing, but that's not true. But like I got hit by a car, but I have insurance. We're adding up data. You're putting it together. Right? And that's giving us a clearer view of reality, but it's still not reality. It's still not eternal reality of the soul. It's still incomplete, just as the physical body and the physical reality is untruth. It's not true. In the same way, the subtle, in the same way, the intellectual is also just another material thing which is not touching the soul. So it's like it's almost like saying we're going to clean the screen with soap, but the soap is still going to stick to the screen, and it's never just going to be a pure screen with no soap. It's either got soap or it's got bird poop on it, right? Right? It's like we've got a clear screen. We're never just going to leave the clean screen clear. We can either have like brown and bird poop and stuff on it, or we can have nice flowers and nice decorations and stuff on it, but it's still not, how do you say, it's still just not pure what it is with unadulterated. So the process of karma yoga, jnana yoga are very good. They even say that karma, physical yoga, is to lead us to jnana yoga. But then jnana yoga is there to lead us to bhakti yoga. And what bhakti yoga, some people, I've got sun in my eyes, but it's okay. Go back a little bit. Bhakti yoga means the yoga of the soul, right? It's just as jnana uses the mind and karma uses the body, then the soul is the yoga of the soul. And what's that, right? How do you identify, how do you do something which is purely soul, that is not body, and that is not mind, that is not physical reality, it's not subtle reality, it's not different types of bird poop, it's just something which is purely the soul. What's that? Well, then you've got to say, well, we've got to know what is the soul. What's the soul made of? What is the dharma, right? We talk about this. What's the dharma? What's the purpose of the soul? What's the composition? What makes the soul the soul? What is it, right? And that's a long discussion. Again, we talked other weeks, we talked about this. But a simple answer is we can say the soul is love, right? Atmendya pritivancha tare bolekam, krishendya pritivancha dore prem nam, is the ancient scriptures that says that if we are trying to bring happiness to ourself selfishly, then this is called lust. You can think of it as love. Oh, she's pretty, right? And we can think of it as love and infatuation, but really it's just our biology, our genes excreting hormones and oxytocin to make us attracted to someone, and this is our biology trying to produce babies or whatever, right? It's not actual love. Actual love, by definition, is selfless. There's no self-interest mixed into that love, right? But that requires knowing what our self is. And then if we're loving someone or something that we don't know what the self of that is, like I can say, okay, I love you or I love you, but if I don't even know you, then how do I love you? Right? Who am I loving? And who's doing that loving? Right? It's not so simple, right? Who's doing that loving? Like, where does that come from? So we could get into this into more detail, but what the ancient spirituality and religion and all this stuff tells us is that a simple way of understanding is that there's God, which is all pervasive, which is super consciousness, which by definition has no connection with this body, with this mind, with this world, with physical reality. It's on a different dimension. And loving God, because love by nature is there's a giver and a receiver of love, right? There's a giving and receiving. There's an interchange. Otherwise, it's not love. Otherwise, it's a derivative of love, and we talked about this last time, right? It's neutrality. It's nothingness, right? The Brahman state, which is also, I don't want to confuse you guys with that, right? That's a whole nother philosophy. But for love to really be love, there's a giver, there's a receiver, there's a two-way exchange of that love, there's a relationship. That's why we talk about like the masculine and the feminine aspect of the divine. Radha Krishna Achi Ekyu Sarup Lila Swadide Dori Durup. That God is one by nature, everything comes. But the ancient Vedas tell us that this God, in a sense, is split into two, into the masculine and into the feminine. And there's a loving polarity and attraction that exists between the masculine and feminine poles of God. And entering into that dynamic relationship, that loving, that kind of like a magnetic pull, calling of the soul, that's bhakti yoga. It's awakening the love inside of our soul that is not our body, that is not our mind, and it's on a different sphere, that relationship between us and the divine and God, we can say is Bhakti Yoga, is the process of that. So in the beginning, we were doing a thing called Kirtan, right? And she was singing Radhe Govinda, right? What were we doing in that process, right? Now we know the consciousness, the chitta, we know we know the whole thing. What were we actually doing with the knowledge that we have? One, we were doing karma yoga, right? We were using our voice, we were clapping, we were using our physical body. Hello, how are you doing? Very good. We're almost finished, actually. Yeah. Another one of our regulars. Coming. Yeah. But it's good. If we're recording, you should probably listen to it because it's like it's really good. If I say so myself, right? But it's not me speaking. I didn't make this up. It's coming from other places. So, who wants to catch her up on where we are? We're 50 minutes in and we're getting to like the best part. So we just had like this meal, and we had the appetizers, and we had like the first course and the second course, and now we're at the dessert, the sweet part, right? Which is the best part. But you gotta kind of like know the catch up. So who would like to explain what the chitta is? Okay, like what's one example of chitta? Not to be put on the spot. What's one example of the chitta?
The consciousness.
Consciousness.
Your consciousness.
So is it
your mind?
It's your mind. Your chitta is your consciousness. It's your mind. So what's a metaphor for the consciousness or the mind that we were talking about?
So the chitta, it's our soul, and it's covered by the different.
The chitta is actually the first covering of the soul.
The first covering of the soul. Yeah. Okay.
So that's like the TV screen.
Yeah.
Right, so the chitta is like a TV screen. What else is it like? A glass?
A glass.
Glass
Yeah.
mirror or something.
Like a mirror, right?
But the first protection is the physical body. I thought.
Okay, no, so I didn't explain this. This was in the beginning of the class, right? I didn't explain. So you've got let's do an illustration. Pretend this is you, right?
That's the soul.
But you're better looking. Yeah, that's the soul.
Okay.
That's the true transcendental, absolute spiritualness of all spiritualdom, right? That's like you, then you go there. Then you're like, okay, well, that's by itself is no good. Then you put like a TV screen on top of the soul, and it's watching this TV screen. So there's like stuff going on over here in the thing, and it's watching that TV screen, right? That's the chitta. Is the first covering.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Then you have the identity, which is on top of that, and then on top of that you have the intelligence.
Like a
And-
Russian doll.
Yeah, like a Russian doll, right? And then on top of that you have the mind, and then on top of that you have air. Then on top of that you have fire, then water, then earth. So now anything that's happening, let's pretend this is like my fingers are all these layers. Anything that happens here gets communicated and then gets reflected like a movie on the chitta.
Yeah. Okay.
So anything that we see, is this too confusing? No, we just had all the classes. So anything that we see, anything that we smell, all of our senses, all the information comes and is recorded like a movie on the chitta, and then you're there sitting there watching the movie, and then you've identified with the movie. Now you think you're a character in the movie, and you think that movie is real. That movie is me. That's what's actually going on. That's the truth. Just like when you watch a movie and you cry when something happens, but it's just colors on the screen, but you're identifying with that in the same way. And you've done that for so long and so much that you've kind of like merged with this thing, and you don't even see a difference between you and that movie. It's like The Matrix, right? Or Avatar, or those movies where now you're fully immersed, or like you're getting absorbed in the metaverse now, and it's just like that now becomes reality inside that. Then, this is a recap of what we went over. But the problem is the information that's coming to the chitta is getting, if this screen is, if it's like a clear screen, the information that's coming gets distorted when there's a bird poop on the camera lens that's taking the information in, when there's a dirt, when there's like that. And the coverings, so now when light is coming, information's coming through, it's getting disturbed and distorted, and you're not seeing things the way that they actually are, like you're wearing a glasses with a pink or blue or a different color information coming in. That makes sense? No.
I was following until the very end
Okay.
with the glasses. That part was.
Okay. So one example is as a screen. Another way of viewing it is like a window of glass, right? That everything gets filtered on in between there. But if there's dirt on the screen, then it changes the color. It changes what you're seeing on the screen.
Or like if you have a camera and you're using different types of lenses.
Different types of lenses. It makes it fat. It makes it skinny. Like you've ever been into one of those like as a kid you go and it's like, oh, I'm so fat in the thing, and oh, I'm so skinny, oh, my head, like that is. Light hasn't changed, reality hasn't changed, only your perception of it because of the tools that you're using are distorted. Make sense? So this can be bent and distorted, and it distorts reality, and it's not truth. It's not truth, reality, what we're actually seeing, what we're actually experiencing. And that distortion could be like a misshaping, but it could also be like dirt or impressions that are put onto that chitta. And those impressions is like a scratch, right? So, and everything we do, everything we see is leaving different marks on that chitta, and then that's our world, and that's the life and reality that we live in. So this is just a catch up, right? So what we described is that what spiritual life is cleaning all that muck off, cleaning all the dirt off, and and morphing it to have an accurate view of reality. And we said that there's three different processes of cleaning that. You've got to listen to the whole thing though. We built it up real nicely. 3 ways. One way is karma yoga, or it's the yoga, the process of physicality, of doing things physically in the world to be able to clean that mirror and to oppression. But the problem with karma yoga is that the soul isn't made of physical stuff. So you're trying to you're trying to have an accurate view of reality, but you're using incomplete reality, and it's not fully touching the soul. So it's good, it can clean certain things off, but it's not complete, right? Then there's jnana yoga, which is information or knowledge, understanding what's what, what's not, using our intellect to be able to clean. And it's also a yoga process, which is also okay, but not full, because the mind is not us, the body's not us. Then the highest process is what's called bhakti yoga. And that's when we're just using the soul to spiritualize the soul. Just dealing with the soul. And what's the soul made of? The soul is made of unconditional love. The relationship between us and God. That's what it, by definition, the spiritual domain is. None of this other stuff, none of these things. So bhakti yoga is a passionate, loving relationship of us, the soul, with the super soul, or with the living entity and with God. So what we were doing with kirtan is we were first using karma yoga. We were using physical reality by singing, by moving our bodies, by using our physical being to create impressions on the thing. Then we're using our intellect and our mind when we know what the meaning is, and we're kind of like channeling and focusing our mind there. But the real intention or the real purpose or process of kirtan is to have our soul call out for God. Have our soul call out for that loving relationship. It's called kirtan. It's like some of the culture is the songs are very, very sad, and it's like a crying, and it's like a yearning of the soul to be connected with God. By nature, we don't like to be alone. We always want to be connected. We always want love. And I remember one monk was saying, we come in this world and we're all orphans. We're all saying, where will I have love? Where will I have relationship? Where do I belong? Who's my tribe? How do I be happy? Where do I fit in? Where's my people? Who am I? What am I meant to be? What's my status in the group? Where am I? And we're just suffering and suffering and suffering because we're trying to create that desire of the soul of connecting with God. We're trying to create that connection with other living entities who don't know who they are. So you've just got like these two mirrors and bird poop trying to kiss and connect, but it's, you don't know who you are, they don't know who they are, and there's all this stuff in between that's not any of you. So it's pretty good because at least there's some kind of connection going on, but it's missing. It misses something. It's like an empty hole in the soul. So then we try other relationships and other connections and other types of thing, and we think, oh, maybe if I'm famous and maybe I have all these Instagram followers, right? Or maybe if I'm famous, and the celebrities are just as miserable. And they're even more miserable because they have what they think is going to make them happy and what everyone else thinks, and they've got nowhere else to go, you know. And so bhakti yoga is the yoga of love, the yoga of devotion, the yoga of relationship, about connecting the soul with God. And how do you do that? It's just by loving. But we don't identify with the soul all of the time. We mostly don't, because we don't even know that, because we've always been watching the screen and identifying with the screen. So what do? We use the screen, we use the body, we use the mind, and we kind of have like a mix. It's not just like one medicine. You have like a mix of like several medicine, and that can be like I was describing in India right now, the Rath Yatra festival, 10,000 people with an idol of God jumping up and down and singing and chanting, and that's the highest process.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question. So,
Yes.
For example, I'm at home meditating,
Yes.
and I connect to my pure consciousness,
Yes.
and I'm connected to the soul. So there, I have this sometimes, and I can't even connect to the word I again.
Yes.
But now I go into society.
Yes.
That's the tricky part of it. So
Yeah.
I go through people. Everyone is using the word I'm getting back into identification.
Yes.
Or also, when I get triggered, I get back into identification.
Yeah.
So I have the feeling it still makes sense to work on your triggers and to
Yeah.
work with the mind and everything,
Yes.
that you can stay longer in this pure consciousness. And now the question. Because I'm not sure if I will use this process in the future again, but I used identification to integrate archetypes. Let's say one archetype of divine masculine is the peaceful warrior. So when I'm aware of this, that this archetype is not fully integrated in me, I start to identify with it. I go to samurai, I do different things to identify with the spirit of the peaceful warrior. And when I identify with this, then all my inner rejection is coming up, like beliefs, oh, warriors are bad, and so on. And in this part of identification, I can let go of negative beliefs, and then then the day is coming, I don't have to identify with the peaceful warrior again, and the archetype is integrated. And I'm just curious what you think about this. Does it make sense to use identification to integrate, or is there also technique without identification at all?
So good questions, and it brings up a lot of things, right? One is, I'm going to get to your question in a second, but I want to say something, is that a lot of people, when they come to spiritual life, they're like, I don't want to have to work on my body or my mind. I don't want to have to deal with these things. I'm just spiritual now. All I do is soul stuff.
Yeah,
And they
I'm
don't
not
take,
my- I'm not my
I'm not my
body,
body,
and-
I'm not my mind. I don't take care of any of that. And then they can be quite effed up in the head, right? Not dealt with their childhood issues or whatever. And it can become an excuse of not dealing with reality. And I think that's
Spiritual bypassing.
what, like spiritual bypassing, right? And that's like not healthy to do, right? So even if we are, let's say, like you in example you gave, it's like, okay, I identify with my soul on some level, but then sometimes I'm not, right? It's like, you're only, if you're fully enlightened, then none of it matters, right? The reality is, if you're not, then there's going to be a big percentage of your life, the majority of it, that you're still dealing with your body, you're still dealing with your mind, and you should take care of that, right? You should take care of that properly through therapy and through psychological processes, like you were describing. Now, the specific process that you were describing, actually, before I get there, on the other side, there's some people who think that, oh, spiritual life is just doing psychological personal development, is just how do you say, what happened in my childhood trauma, and what happened this, and what am I thinking about this, and how am I communicating, and blah blah blah. And it's good, right? But then you're missing the soul, right? You kind of need both to be a center balanced human being. And that's kind of what the idea of dharma is, again. Dharma, oftentimes people talk about it as like more, we gave a class on it before, but it's about morality, duty, righteousness, how to be in the world. So if you're a parent, you have a dharma to take care of your children. You have if you're a business person, you have a dharma to do ethical business. So you have like a certain like duties in the world, which is, because it's all external, it's all material, it's not the soul. But still, you want to balance both of them, right? So you need to do the soul stuff and the body and the mind stuff, right? As a whole integrated being. That's why there is the yoga stretching for your body, for your mind, but then also to chant the mantras and to have the love of your soul, of the soul. Now, specifically about your subject, I think it's actually a very, very powerful process of personal development to work with identity and archetypes.
Thank you.
And the reason
It's really important for me to know if the Vedic view is also
supports that
supports
methodology.
that, yes.
And
Very good.
yes, and the reason is because, like I talk multiple times, I wrote a book on it, right? The earth, water, fire, the elemental spectrum. The more subtle the elements go, the more powerful they are over the physical. The more powerful those forces are over the physical, and the most subtle element is identity. Is beliefs, is ideas, is archetypes, beliefs about you have about yourself. That's like the most subtle you can go. So it's, in a sense, it's kind of like the deepest level of personal development is who do you identify with and who do you see yourself as, and that. So it's very powerful form of personal development, I would say, from the philosophy. It's kind yeah, like an affirmation can be that, but it can also not be that. Anyway, so yeah. That kind of answer the question.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts?
Is there like a correlation or like soul level identity that you take on in soul therapy work?
I mean,
Does that make sense? You know what I mean?
like what's the archetype of the pure soul?
Like, in our work of like working with the soul, do we take on a soul identity in that process?
Yeah. Well, one is
Like,
that soul has an identity,
yeah.
and we're trying to understand what is our true nature. What's the nature of who are we? What's our identity? And that's a personal, individual identity that we have. However, there is also, in a sense, an archetype to it, or there is an archetype, and that's that of a servant, of a giver of love, rather than the receiver of love. That the reason, we didn't talk about this in this class, but the reason that puts us in this whole world in the first place is that we want to be God. We want everything to be for us. We want everyone to be serving us. We want it to. We think we're the center of the world. That it's all about my happiness. It's all about what I want. It's all selfish, me, right? And then that's what caused the whole mess in the beginning. We're not going to get into that in much detail. But Bhakti Yoga is, I want to give love for no reason, just because it is me. Selflessly love, selflessly serve, and the archetype of that you can say is dasya in Sanskrit, which means to be the servant of God.
Okay.
So that's,
And then, okay, that answer. And my other question is, how do you differentiate actions that are creating impressions on the chitta versus actions that are actually cleansing the chitta? Like, what's the difference?
that's a very good question, deep question. Do you understand the question? Or the question is, we talked about the chitta, the mirror that's covering. So some actions we said is painting it, right, and then putting nice stuff on it and cleaning bird poop off.
Yeah,
And
it
the
can be
other,
good or bad,
and there's other
right?
actions that are clearing it so that there's nothing on it.
For example, I donate, don't know, money for a good thing. Don't know, clean it.
What does that do?
Or do
Yeah.
it nothing,
Yeah.
because when I do it only for the reason, don't know, to get a better, was das Gewissen, keine Ahnung,
Better feeling.
better feeling.
Yeah.
I think it's not the true.
That's true.
It's not a true.
It's not cleaning it.
Yeah, it's not cleaning it.
it's
because
just
not the
coloring
true
it
mindset,
nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I've read studies that if I do philanthropy work and work in a soup kitchen, I'll be happier. So I'll do it so I
Yeah.
can be happy, right? So that's still much better than going around and shooting people,
Yeah.
right? And you will be happier, and it does work that way. However, it's not necessarily working on a soul level.
Yeah,
It's working
think so,
just
too.
on creating a good impression, a good mark
Yeah.
on the chitta, right? So what it you could say cleaning it is when you're removing it, you could say, and only dealing with what is the nature of the soul. So when it's, I know you know this, when it's pure bhakti, then that's actually cleaning it. When it's karma yoga, jnana yoga, karma jnana anavritam, when it's got these other things mixed into it,
Other
then
desires.
it's mixed. Karma, gyan, yoga, like that.
Like,
That was more when it's mixed, like the kirtan, right? We are doing something which is a calling love from the soul. Part of it's just like music, and we like to do music, right? So we're putting good colors on by the music, but then the soul part is actually also cleaning it with the soul. But other people might just be doing music without any soul part, and it could be good color music as well. That's like a good kind of uplifting music. We're going to talk about different levels of consciousness, but like a higher level of conscious music, but it's still not actually cleaning it, but it's still better than nothing. So this is getting very advanced for this class. There's a whole book called Bhakti Tattva Vivek, which is talking about, it's a whole book going into the different types of bhakti yoga and the levels of purity of that bhakti yoga, and knowing a distinction between the different qualities of bhakti. And that's more advanced kind of discussion. But simple summary of that is that if we're identifying with the body and the mind, then it's still got some type of material conditioning. And when it's just the soul, which is very rare, which is impossible when we first start. So you're going to start doing a mixed thing before you can do just a pure soul thing anyway. It's going to be that way. So I don't know, does that answer your question? Kind of, yeah. So there's different processes of bhakti. I kept on giving the example of kirtan, right? And then there's different processes, and they fall on different levels of the spectrum of purity. Like later, we're going to give you some sweets to eat, right? What did you make today?
Banana cake.
A banana cake, right? So we're gonna eat. She's happy, right?
It's vegan.
So this banana cake, on one level, it makes her smile like this, right? And it makes her happy. On one level, there's the natural carbs inside of it that are going and releasing serotonin inside of our brain, and then giving us blood sugar and energy, and working on a physical level, right? On one level, it's a nice social thing. Social people get together and we eat, and then we're getting the neurological and nicely healthy, wholesome entertainment of being in a social group, rather than being, taking cocaine with a gang or something like that, right? It's like it's
Okay.
yeah, don't do cocaine, right? So
a cookie is better than a cocaine.
yeah. So and then so that's on another level. But on another level, this is not just random food that we brought. We took this, and before coming here, I did an offering and a ceremony where we're giving it to God and creating love. So there's a little bit of, you could say, God's energy in the food, right? There's a little bit of God's energy. So the part of it is working on your serotonin, part of it's working on your blood sugar, and then part of it's actually touching the soul on a spiritual level. What?
It's made with love.
It's made with love,
you taste
and it's
it.
kind of like infused with some of that love. And so then even eating, now that's a spiritual process, right? So this temple, like I told, in India, right now they have the thousands of year old tradition of the huge festival where the whole navy comes in to do for Rath Yatra. They also have a cooking tradition there. Like half the temple is just a kitchen, and they have these recipes that they've cooked, the same exact recipe with the vegetables from the same fields, and the same exact recipe for hundreds and thousands of years. The same recipe. So you're like, how did people eat thousands of years ago? You have it. And modern Indian cooking has even evolved to be different, but they use the same traditional recipe. Like chilies. In India, everything you eat has chili. There they don't have chili, because it's like before chili came to India. The recipes, and they cook on clay pots and fires. It's really cool. But there's a whole culture around the temple of taking that prasad, of taking that. People, I go there, I sing in the kirtan, I see the deity, I be part of this festival and this procession, right? I hear a class like this, and then I also take the prasad, and there's these different processes, and some are more closer to bhakti or closer to nature of the soul, the others. This goes then to the idea of having a guru or spiritual teacher. Is if if their soul is more awakened and they're identified more with the soul than they are of the body, simply being in their presence or being in their association then also nourishes the soul. So there's main, spiritual practices. Sadhu Sangha, which is associating with people who are awakening their soul. Nama Kirtan, chanting the names of the Lord, of God, which is what we were doing, Kirtan. Bhagavat Shravan, which is hearing these things like we're doing now. So if I have any love in my heart, then it's getting transferred a little bit into your heart while you're listening to it. If I have any love for God, just a little bit, right? And then you listen more and more, then hopefully it will come. So that, like in the beginning, I was saying with my guru, I was lucky to travel with him and I was able to hear from him to try to get those impressions in my heart. It's called Bhagavat Shravan. Then Mathura Vas, which is the idea that there's certain sacred places where a lot of spiritual practices happened and that place gets vibrating with that energy. Like right now, we have a little bit of spiritual energy here and we've done a few programs, so this place is slightly spiritualized. So the next time we come here, it's got some more power for a spiritual practice rather than somewhere completely new. And then let's say there's some special temples that for thousands of years so much has been going on there, then just going there is like wow, like you go to some churches or some spiritual places that you can just feel the vibrancy of that. So that's like Mathura Vas. And then Mathura Vas, Sri Murti Shraddhaya Savan. And then there's also, like, some people could say, well, it's idol worship, but like in India they have like a figure of God, and then it's like that becomes like a mailbox. That's like a weird way, but it's a channel for that love and that relationship. So if I take it, I'm trying to learn to not be selfish for me, but I'm taking what I'm gonna, instead of taking from me, take it and I offer it to that idol, I offer it to that deity, and then I take it as reverence. Now that becomes a process, because God exists anywhere, he can come in there and accept it, right? In that place. So those are like the 5 main powerful processes that are more connected with the soul. If that makes sense.
I have one more question.
Yes.
About karma yoga.
About what?
Karma yoga.
Karma yoga.
Karma yoga. So,
Yeah.
and
Kama and karma are different. Kama means lust, like sex,
Okay.
and karma
Karma.
means actions. I was just trying to get clear what you were talking about.
Karma yoga.
Yeah.
Action.
Yeah.
And about resolving it through receiving, not only through giving.
Yeah.
Because I was giving a lot the last years, and my family is very masculine, and the masculine is about giving. So the more I healed the mother wound, the more I allowed myself to receive, and I have the feeling to resolve my karma, I have to receive.
Yeah.
Because it always sounds like resolving karma, we have to give, but especially in Germany, we have to learn to receive. And I just wanted to add this, and what do you think about this?
So on a personal development level, then to be kind of like archetypically balanced, then to be in a healthy relationship, there's giving and there's receiving, there's having your boundaries, and not being caught up in like negative, cycles of being like a victim or being only the giver, and not being able to accept anything, and loving yourself, and yeah, that's completely correct. We have to be able to receive, we have to be able to give on that level. On a
Don't connect it
completely
to karma.
I mean, you could say that. You could say, I don't know if you would use the word, yeah, you could use the word karma. You could use the word karma, which is like the Vedas talk about an archetypical relationship, right, between two individuals. And what is the dharmic, right? What's the dharma? What's the proper way of how relationship should be? So if it's only one person just taking and then the other person just giving and not getting and receive, then it's out of balance, and that relationship is not dharma. It's not according to the nature of the way the relationship should be. So you could say that it's good for your psychological well-being, but even to be able to create a balanced state, in a sense you could say it's like a karma yoga, to learn how to be in a proper relationship where you're giving and receiving without guilt trips and without in a psychological messed up way. And you can say, yeah, that is a karma yoga process. That does make sense. However, when we're talking on a bhakti yoga level, which is on the complete nature of the soul, yes, Amito tomar tumito amar ki kaja paradana. One song is like, God, you are mine and I am yours, right? like we're there is a giving and receiving is a natural tendency. However, pure bhakti or pure love of the heart doesn't want anything. It's completely selfish and just wants to give. Naturally, by giving, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And again in the Gita, it says, God says, however much you love me, I respond accordingly. Right? So that receiving will happen automatically, but the beauty of it is that we don't intend to receive anything for it. There's no intention of that receiving, but the receiving will be there, right? But that's very different than an unhealthy psychological dynamic where someone's like, I'm not worthy and no one can give anything, and you can't smile and accept a gift.
And would you say it's important to go out of a relationship like this? Because
A relationship like what?
I'm in a relationship where I'm in the giving part, and it's just the other person can't give in the moment, you know?
Yeah.
So I can sense myself I'm judging the other person, so I always take back my judgment, forgive, and it is like it is. The
Yeah.
person can't give, so it's disbalanced, and
Yeah.
it's not possible to balance it right now.
Yeah.
So, but it also feels wrong for me to leave it completely,
Yeah.
not because I'm dependent or something, just because out of unconditional love, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
The more I heal, I realize my relationships won't be balanced anymore.
Yeah.
Or-
It's harder to find someone who's
or less-
balanced, right? To
yeah,
match.
less-
Yeah.
less balanced relationships, and so what do I do if the other person is just weaker?
You've got to, I mean, this is a very personal journey, right? It's very individual. Don't do any, don't listen to what I say in a sense. Like you've got to
Yeah.
see what works in a relationship. But in principle, it's like nothing is ever perfect in the world. Everything's going to be out of balance in some way. Like right now, in one sense, it's a perfect moment. In another sense, it's like, okay, we've been sitting down for a while, now it's time to change things, right? So there's always going to be something in balance and something out of balance, and there's always going to be some disbalance, right? And really, life, on a practical sense, is about navigating how much out of balance can we go with this one thing, and is it worth it, and how do we come back into balance? Right? So you can be like, for example, yoga, the meditation, or yogic stretching exercises, or some of these things is like, okay, you're living your day and now you're thrown off, and then now I need to do something to realign myself so that I'm okay, right? So when it comes to relationships, it's like, okay, like for example, I have family members that are unbalanced, and I can be like, I'm never going to have a relationship with you. Or I can be like, I know that when I'm getting in a relationship with you, when I'm speaking with you, it's not going to be healthy. It's like you're not going to be as emotionally mature and loving. Hello. We're almost done. We're gonna do the kirtan soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. So what I'm saying is, like, when I'm with that family member, I know that they're not going to be able to give me what I need, and they're emotionally handicapped and incapable of being in a loving relationship. Then I make the judgment call: is it still worth going into that situation, and how much out of balance will it make me? If I can go out of balance temporarily and then come back into balance later, then it might be worth keeping the relationship. But there might be someone that is always, I have another person I had a relationship with, right? And every time I was around, they're always out of balance, always out of balance, always out of balance for them and for me, and it was just this chaos and drama, and the relationship wasn't serving me or them, and the best was just to cut that relationship for them and for me, and to bring it into balance would be too much work for not worth it, right? So it's kind of like a case by case basis. Is it worth sometimes being thrown off? Can we bring the relationship back into balance, or can I or do I need to cut this off? Is it throwing things off too much for me? And it's yes, that's navigating life. It's different every time. Like even in this moment right now, in a sense, we're in a relationship, in a dynamic where we're spending time together, and if let's say you keep on asking questions, it's balanced. So I'm asking questions back and forth and it's good. But then if you keep me till like 2 o'clock in the morning asking questions, I'll be like, thank you. I know you have more questions and maybe you have more need that I can do, but I've got other things that I need to do. My respects. I love you, but goodbye. Right? There's like having that balance of how far you're willing to let it affect you or not. And that's it's just a process. I think you're on the process. So.
Yes. Thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts? We're good? So we're going to do more kirtan. And now we know why, right? So what kirtan would you like to do, Wale?